Hello, welcome to a new episode of Eye on Academia, a monthly podcast presented by the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. The Martin Center is dedicated to the reporting and analysis of higher education events, policies, and trends. I'm Jay Shallon, the host for today, and a senior fellow with the Martin Center. Higher education's influence on the intellectual life of the nation is hard to overestimate. It is where most new ideas are conceived, incubated, and spread to the general population. If you don't like the direction the nation is moving in any aspect, political, cultural, educational, and so on, chances are you have academia to thank, at least in part. Therefore, our colleges and universities need eyes on them so that they cannot operate in secrecy and use their influence to undesirable ends. We hope this program serves just that purpose. The world of higher education is in constant flux today. It is getting hit on all sides by political changes, by technical changes, and by cultural changes. Today's episode features all three. Jenna Robinson, the Martin Center's president, will start with some political change. The state of Florida recently passed a bill that pushes back against the woke campus. Then Graham Hillard, our managing editor, will address some technical change. The changing university library that emphasized technology while downgrading old-fashioned books. And finally, writer Shannon Watkins will talk about the growing infantilization of campuses as many students appear less and less ready for adulthood. Jenna, you want to lead off?
Sure. So this is a really exciting change coming out of Florida. In many ways, Florida is leading the charge on university reform with mixed results. But this particular reform, I think, is a very good one. It is a bill that has two parts. The first part is campus intellectual diversity. It sets up new offices on campus, and the purpose of those offices would be to host public policy debates. And we know from research that we've done here at the Martin Center, and that George Lanou has done in his book, Silent Stages, that most campuses do not have any public policy debates at all. And the reason that matters is that students need an example of how to disagree agreeably, to be civil to each other, to make productive conversations. And so that's the purpose of this, is to bring that intellectual diversity to campus and also to model civil discourse. And so I think that's a really exciting change that will happen at Florida universities. We already have an example of how it might work because we have the program for public discourse at UNC Chapel Hill. It kind of provides a model of doing that. So I'm excited for that to come to Florida. And then the other part of the bill is to prohibit political litmus tests in hiring and in admissions. And that is partially based off a Martin Center bill that was co-written with Stanley Kurtz of the Ethics and Public Policy Center and the Goldwater Institute. And what that does is says that no political litmus tests, i.e. DEI statements, can be required for hiring, for promotion, for tenure, for any kind of employment, and also in students' applications. And so both of those things were put together in this one bill, which has been passed by Florida's legislature. And we are expecting that Governor DeSantis will sign it as well. So it's good news for Florida.
Yes, that is really good news. I feel particularly strong about bringing debates to campus because I really do think that students are hungry for those kinds of opportunities. I recently went to a Braver Angels debate at NC State here in North Carolina. And at first, the students who came in the auditorium, you could tell that due to the sensitive nature of the topic that was being debated, people were a little nervous at first. But the format of this debate was just so good at easing tensions and making everyone, regardless of what they believed, feel like they could express their views without being attacked, and with a fair chance of a response from those who disagree with them. It was students warmed up to the debate so fast to the point where the debate it had to be forcibly stopped at the end just because they ran out of time. So I think that's a great idea.
I was a graduate student at New York University in 2004, and we had a mock presidential debate, but it was between John Kerry and Ralph Nader because they couldn't find anybody to play Bush, and it was so obvious that nobody on campus other than me was going to vote for Bush in the first place. So it just goes to show how much, even 20 years ago, debate on campus was truncated by ideological uniformity. Which is why I think that the viewpoint diversity and anti-litmus test provisions in this bill are so significant. I mean, even if hiring committees are still on a kind of sneaky basis, figuring out the ideological persuasions of applicants, which I'm sure will happen, it is a step in the right direction. That there isn't going to be a formal stamp of approval on this litmus testing anymore.
Absolutely. I think the biggest positive out of this is that we know that a lot of applications were making their very first stop at the DEI office instead of with the faculty. And so by eliminating the DEI statements, that eliminates the stop at the DEI office, which means that faculty are the ones who are making the first cut, rather than, ideological czars in the university. And so I think that they will only be better outcomes in terms of, putting merit before ideology and really committing to excellence. So I think that, yes, even if faculty are kind of like sneakily figuring out who's conservative, we're going to get a better outcome than there would be otherwise, even if it's not perfect.
And another good thing this bill does is it has a lot of oversight. It gives oversight to, I believe it's to the board, in which various academic entities have to report to the board about how they're doing on free speech and so on and so forth. Now, like all things, it's never going to go quite far enough. There's no punishment for a school that if a school doesn't meet proper criteria, and but that's something that that there's at least a hint of oversight. There's at least an attempt to provide some oversight. Devil's always in the details, but this is the board being as aggressive as it should be, or almost as aggressive as it should be, or the legislature being as aggressive as it should be, to go beyond just the easy stuff.
Right. And I think that Florida's legislature actually probably has the necessary commitment and political will to pull back funding if universities are not following through on these commitments. We know that a lot of legislatures do not have the political will to do that, but I think that at least Florida, the way it is right now, would not hesitate to cut funding to a university, at least in some small measure, if they did not follow through on the law.
And another positive thing is, yes, Florida is doing this, but there are, I believe, as many as 20 other states have diversity, equity, and inclusion anti-DEI legislation pending. So it's not just Florida leading the charge and everybody staying back and saying, yeah, you go your way, we're just going to follow the old ways. So I think there's even 3 others that now considering it. So that's almost half the states are considering legislation just like that. So that's
and
another.
North Carolina is on that list. It has a bill prohibiting compelled speech. And so it's not the same bill that's in Florida. It's not as explicit about DEI statements, but it does ban any kind of statement. So it kind of is a blanket ban on requiring any statements on social or political issues. And so in effect, it does the same thing. So yeah, it's great that North Carolina is on that list as well.
And it should be easy. I mean, even if some of our listeners are men and women of the left, it should be easy to imagine why this kind of rule is necessary. I mean, imagine for a moment a public university asking applicants for a statement on their religiosity. It would never pass muster. It would be rightly outraged by that. But here we have a separate set of one might argue, equally metaphysical beliefs that are being held up as a standard to which one has to conform. It's un-American, and I'm very glad that they're trying to put a stop to it.
How even-handed has the left been in these similar situations in the last couple of decades? Because it always seems to me that they, it's okay for me, but not for thee is kind of their attitude. So I just wonder on that.
I think there are a lot of people who are identified with the center left who are on campus who have no love for these DEI statements, but just prefer to keep quiet.
Oh, without question, the center left, there are a lot of people who really are sick of all of this politicization, and they just want to teach and be scholars.
Yeah, teach, do research, and keep their heads down.
Yes. Okay, Graham, you want to take us to the library?
Sure. I want to talk about a recent piece on the Martin Center's website by Dan E. Way. And the title of the piece is, Will UNC Libraries Toss Their Books? I would encourage all of our listeners to read this piece. It's very data driven. There are a lot of numbers bouncing around, but the long and short of it is that digitization is happening at UNC system libraries, and it's speeding up. And while I don't envision ultimately 16 bookless libraries, it is very much the case that digitization is going to be a bigger part of the library experience in the future. One of the things that Way does in this piece is he strolls through the main library at NC State, and he talks a little bit about the robotic book delivery system that is available. It's called the Book Bot. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It is real. And our author, Dan Way, was interviewing students at random at the NC State Library, and none of them had ever heard of the Book Bot, or they didn't know where it was, and they never used it. Of course, this is a national story, but it is interesting that it's happening right here in North Carolina under our noses. First of all, it's somewhat dehumanizing, I think, to be to have our paper books ripped from our hands and replaced with bits and bytes. But then, of course, there's also the issue of political control. I think all of our readers have probably, and all of our listeners have probably been following the story of leftist publishers bowdlerizing, for example, Roald Dahl. And there's a limit to how much old copies of Dahl or Agatha Christie or Shakespeare can be altered to align with contemporary progressive orthodoxies. And the limit is that literally there are millions of copies already out there in people's personal libraries. But if all of our books become digital, well, now it's just a push of a few buttons, and the content is forever gone, forever changed. And so my fear here is that library digitization is a way of bringing increasing sectors of knowledge under political discipline.
Mm-hmm.
We have always been at war with Oceania. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely a danger. And I think another danger, which is, unrelated to that one, is that students will just not retain as much information. There is good research out there that shows that reading paper books is better in most circumstances. It doesn't matter if you're reading like a quick little novel and you're not trying to retain and you're just trying to get the plot. But for reading dense material, the kind of material you should be expected to learn and read in universities, paper is better. People retain more, they retain it for longer, they understand more, their comprehension is up. And so for all of those reasons, I think that we should not try to go all the way digital. Universities are supposed to be teaching students. I think they're supposed to be teaching them some facts. And they're not going to remember any of that if it's all on a screen.
Yeah, as someone who is a fan of not 100%, but of using Kindle, because it is helpful if you need to reference something and you have a pile of books, let's say, that you have to drag around campus. Having a digital option as a complement to paper books is helpful. I feel similarly about Audible or audiobooks. I enjoy having an audiobook available if I'm on the go or driving as a reinforcement to get a broad picture of maybe a story or a person's argument. But I don't think, again, that audiobooks should replace print. I think we need to think about this as complements and not doing away with print altogether.
Right. Right. I mean, I think one place where digitization does make sense is for academic journals. There's a very low demand for each individual academic journal. And of course, everything is changing all the time because studies are being refuted and replaced. And so having access to academic journals online makes sense because it's a periodical, right? And so you want that all of them to be available instead of the little paper copies. But I think that for books, which once it's written, once Orwell or Dahl or who else has written a book, it's static. It's not like a growing body of research. And so having that as a book that is a permanent thing makes much more sense.
The good news is it is possible to resist this. I've been following a story out of Vermont State University. In early February of this year, Vermont State announced plans for an all-digital academic library. There was a huge student backlash. And so they backed off a little bit and said that, okay, we're still going to do that, but we're going to keep more physical books. And then there was still a backlash. And then finally they said, please don't fire us all. We're canceling the whole idea. So I would encourage everyone, if you want to laugh, just Google Vermont State University Digital Library and go to the news tab, and you just see these stories laid out chronologically. Vermont comes up with stupid plan. Vermont partially backtracks. Vermont fully backtracks. It's just a delight.
That's great news.
I will look that
What is
up.
the impetus behind this digitization? I understand why, if you're going to buy new things, it's less expensive to get digital ones. But why get rid of old books that you already have in order to replace them with digital copies?
So no word on that. I mean, they do. The institution does talk about financial strain. I think somewhat cynically, Vermont State argued that digitization would help them reach more rural residents. I mean, that's probably true, but I just can't believe that was the real reason. I suspect it was to funnel money elsewhere, or for political reasons. I think that for many of the people who control campuses and academic libraries, the ability to stealth edit existing texts in digital form is a feature rather than a bug.
It's one of the reasons that I love that we have a library here at the Martin Center that has real paper books on its shelves, many of which are old. And now we can prove, this is exactly what was written. We don't have to rely on the digital copy.
Well, one benefit on a university campus, I just recall when I was a student at UCLA, they just didn't have space for all of the books that they had. And I'm sure this is true at many universities. They stored a lot of books in what they call the reserves. And so if I needed a particular book and it wasn't in the stacks, I had to wait a certain amount of time, maybe even a week before the book was retrieved from wherever the reserves were kept, I imagine in a deep, dark basement. And so having a digital copy of that obscure book would have been helpful if I needed that information quickly.
Right.
So that's one area. If there's actually so many books that they can't contain it, that would be helpful. I don't see why it would justify taking books away, though.
Well, maybe that's what you can use the book bot for. You use the book bot to go get things out of the reserves, but you still keep all of the most popular things in the stacks.
Definitely.
I think it might be a good compromise of like using technology in a way that makes sense without, doing it either for nefarious or just, pointless reasons.
Universities with money can follow Harvard's lead. They've been expanding their library underground for decades.
I wonder, how many books have never been checked out? They've been sitting in that area in the library for 25 years. I think that it seems to me that they tend to overbuy. They buy every obscure thing, and they're kind of pressured maybe to support university publishers, and so it seems like they could be a little better in their selectivity.
Well,
Jen?
I just want to push on that real quick. Maybe they don't have the right books in the stacks in the first place, because I just recently requested a book by C.S. Lewis. Granted, it's not one of his better known works, but it's an experiment in criticism. And I had to wait several weeks for the university to retrieve an experiment in criticism from its secret reserves, wherever they were. And I just can't understand why that wasn't available in the stacks in the first place.
I had to request the Wake County Library to buy a copy of Orthodoxy, not because I couldn't go buy one on my own, but because I thought it was ridiculous that a public library, no public library in Wake County, which is one of the most populous counties in North Carolina, did not have a copy of G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy. So I think you're onto something, that they're just not buying the right books in many cases.
That's just anti-Catholic bias. That's unacceptable.
That must be it.
Come to my library.
Now,
I'll give it to you.
I think one of the things that they're trying to sell this oh boy, that's going to be a rough one. Digitization is to cut costs, but I don't think that they're doing that as Graham's article suggests. The newer libraries all have all kinds of bells and whistles, like what is it? The 3D. They have 3D printers and this and that. They're trying to integrate themselves into various parts of the curriculum where they've never been. And I think it might be to save jobs, but they could be, you could see where it could be used to save money, such as with the academic journals, but I don't think they are. I think I think at University of California, Berkeley, they're closing down the anthropology library with its hard copy books to build like a $500 million digitized library. So they're missing an opportunity to use digitization properly.
Yeah, I think a lot of it maybe is just trying to stay relevant.
Mm-hmm.
That's the buzzword. And you said, 3D printers, that's relevant, that's new, that's fancy. And so maybe, they just want to be cool like everybody else.
Yeah, well, it's who is winning in the universities. It's obviously the trendy, technical, corporate people, and in a rare case where the trads and the rads are joined up for their hard copy books, they're kind of on the losing end, maybe. Okay, Shannon, do you want to, as a mother of three, do you want to talk about your topic?
Yes, I am going to be talking about infantilism, or the infantilization of college students. I think a lot of people have seen headlines over the last few years. This is a growing trend where colleges will, especially at the end of a semester when finals kick up, they provide these zones for de-stressing. You can often find Play-Doh or Legos or sweet treats. Universities even organize events where students can pet some puppies I think I've heard of even a pony being made available at one point. These activities are not just limited to the end of the semester. There are permanent safe space zones on campus that are designated rest places where students can feel safe. And safety here doesn't just mean obviously being safe from violence or physical harm. It means safety in the more general sense of not having to deal with contradiction, with ideas that one doesn't like, that might make one feel uncomfortable. Dennis Prager, who's a radio host, and comedian Adam Carolla made a whole documentary on this topic a few years ago called No Safe Spaces. And the basic message of the movie was that as funny or ridiculous as nap zones are, these college antics are not harmless. The consequence of infantilizing college students can be very serious, and it translates into the real world. It's training a generation of adults to expect little to no friction in life. And this is obviously setting them up for failure. It also gets them accustomed to having everything their way. And I believe in the movie, and I agree, they say, look, mob violence, political correctness, suppression of speech, this all goes hand in hand with infantilizing college students. And honestly, I'm not even sure if the term infantilization is really good, because we shouldn't even treat children, actual children, like this. From an early age, we have to teach little kids how to be resilient and that not everything's going to go their way. A toddler, and I'm speaking from experience here, a toddler may only want to eat chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. But
True story.
But parents definitely shouldn't cave to a screaming tantrum. Tantrums for toddlers are developmentally appropriate because they're beginning to learn impulse control and emotional regulation, something college students, by the way, should have, but toddlers don't. And being 2 and 3, it is during those times of toddlerhood and childhood where we're learning how to control our appetites and desires and put reason in charge. And it's parents' job to set appropriate boundaries and help our children learn these skills. So the proper response to a 2-year-old's tantrum isn't, it stresses you out when you don't get to eat your chicken nuggets, so you can just have what you want. I feel like that's what colleges are telling college students a lot of times, but we don't even say that to a 2-year-old. I have conversations with my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old, but especially my 2-year-old, where he'll ask for something and I'll either say no or not yet. And he counters, but I love it. And his argument is, if I like something, I should have it. And he's learning at age 2 that that's not always the case. And my 4-year-old is already learning how to not let other people's behavior affect her. The 2-year-old might say something that really annoys her, and instead of completely losing her cool, which she does, she's learning to not pay attention to him or walk away if needed. What would this look like if this scenario played out on a college campus? I really am serious. Would there be a safe space where 4-year-olds didn't have to be annoyed by 2-year-olds? This concept is ridiculous. So I just want to share this quote from Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. They wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And they say, rather than trying to protect students from words and ideas that they will inevitably encounter, colleges should do all they can to equip students to thrive in a world full of words and ideas they cannot control.
Shannon, I think you make a really good point that these skills should be things that college students come to college with already. You shouldn't have to wait to college to teach someone how to be resilient. This is something the parents should be doing. And so that I think that's a big part of the problem, is that parents have utterly failed to teach their children how to become adults, which is what college students really should be. Parents do give in to tantrums. Parents do let children eat whatever they want. Parents do let kids talk back and fail to clean their rooms and get away with disrespect, and all of these other things that then translate into bad behavior on college campuses and expectations that are just completely out of line with reality.
This subject reminds me of a piece that I wrote for the Martin Center earlier this spring called "The University as Life Coach." And the hook of this piece was a report by a Massachusetts think tank called the Mary Christie Institute, which reported that they surveyed 22 to 28-year-olds in possession of a bachelor's degree, and 39% of respondents faulted their colleges for failing to prepare them for the emotional impact of their transition to the workplace. And so you have all these newly employed college graduate young adults saying, well, working life in which I, don't get everything I want is really like an emotional roller coaster for me because I'm so unprepared by my college. And as Jenna was saying, by my parents for that life. Kind of a sad commentary on what colleges are doing. Now, I think there's tension, right, between two different outcomes here. Like, are all of these coddled students going to crash and burn out of the American economy, or are they going to warp the American economy in their image? I think, of course, we see some of that, or we saw some of it pre-COVID. You'd get the reports of the tech firms with their ping pong rooms and beer on tap and whatnot. But I think by and large, the for-profit American economy just can't accommodate this kind of infantilized workforce. And there are going to be some folks who have to learn the hard way and quickly how to, make it through the work week.
Well, I mean, I think that in that way, you're right that the corporate America can't provide all of that. But something else that I think students are getting, is another symptom of this on college campuses, is the overall lower academic expectations. And that is absolutely translating into corporate America. We know from studies that students don't study as much as they used to. They don't have to read as many pages in books as they used to. They don't have to write as many essays as they used to, or write as many pages or as long essays as they used to. And so all of these lower expectations for higher grades, because we know we've got grade inflation, kind of train students not to have the right preparation when they go into the workforce for things like deadlines and having to actually deliver on something that they have said they will deliver on as part of their job. And so I think that is probably more dangerous than, the Play-Doh and the puppies, which we can all just make fun of. But that really matters. If you are not used to performing to a particular standard and then you go out in the workforce, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to perform your job very well. And there are some jobs where it really, really does matter. You can't miss a deadline. You can't turn in an assignment that is below par. It will have serious consequences.
And just the time commitment. I mean, the full-time American worker is for the most part full-time. The phrase full-time college student is nothing more than a registration office term of art at this point. Like, even those college students who are full-time students allegedly are not studying and going to class full-time, which is why, so many of my students before I came to the Martin Center were full-time students, quote unquote, but also worked 40 hours a week at some off-campus job.
I don't even think that a lot of them expect to attend class when they're supposed to anymore. So yeah, well, it's a problem.
No, I was going to just bring up, especially in the world of post-COVID, colleges were enacting policies where students, without any explanation, had the right to just take a day to miss a class, to miss an assignment. I was listening to a talk about this yesterday, and the speaker rightly asked, when I was a student and I had bronchitis, but I had to push through to complete an assignment, where is that work ethic anymore? It's gone.
Well, I'm going to push back a little against the idea of the nap pods. There are going to be some students, like Graham was saying, they're working a full-time job, they're trying to get through school. And you generally find this more at the commuter colleges, the big city public universities, et cetera, where these people, people are pulling all-nighters, and it might not be the worst thing to have a place for them to sleep for, sleep between classes for a couple hours. So,
Well, at least in my campus in Los Angeles, a very common sight, and I mean very common sight in any place at campus, whether it's like in this between two columns of a building or on a couch in the library, there would be people passed out all the time. And no one thought anything of it because they clearly pulled an all-nighter and they're taking a cat nap. So they're
well, Shannon, you went to school at UCLA, and from what I understand, people are sleeping all over the city now. So, most of them are homeless, but
this was back in the day.
Yeah, this is an LA thing, maybe. I don't know.
We all survived sleeping under desks on the floor. So, I think it might actually be good for Generation Z to get that experience, just like the rest of us.
And I also kind of think that this is part of a continuum of how schools treat students. There's the old phrase in loco parentis, in the absence of parents. In the old days, schools had very strict social rules. You couldn't go out past a certain time, no men in the women's dorm, and so on and so forth. And so schools used to control students like parents, and that kind of went away. And schools started developing, they started providing entertainment and certain things. And now they've kind of gone back to, they are acting in loco parentis, but as really bad parents.
Very, very permissive parents.
Right.
Yes.
They're very permissive on one hand, and on the other hand, they're spoiling the heck out of them on the other. So, that's it. So this is kind of a long standing thing that's been going on. And before that, I mean, in Europe, there is no anything. You just show up for class and that's it, pretty much.
Yeah, the University of Tennessee got in trouble some years ago for having what was called Sex Week on campus, which was filled with bizarrely graphic instructional programming for undergraduates. And yet those same students went from there to the Play-Doh room. So it's a bizarre combination of licentiousness and pampering.
Yeah, well, that's a good note to end it, don't you think? We don't want to discuss Sex Week much more. So anyway, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please like, follow, share, rate, subscribe, or even say something nice about us in the comments. And if you want to see the full range of Martin Center content, please visit our website at www.jamesgmartin.center. Thank you.